With the recent release of the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion Remaster, players young and old are flocking to Cyrodiil to take on Mehrunes Dagon and stop the Oblivion Crisis. But with every new or reimagined iteration of an Elder Scrolls game, players will quickly have to decide what kind of character they want to be. And so today I thought with the help of Oblivion's new character creation screen and a few other elements like this chart, we could go over each race briefly and see which one feels right for you. And so without further ado, let's begin. And so we're here inside of the Oblivion character creation screen, although you can also just take this concept and apply it to other Elder Scrolls games if you like, although some of the things that I'm going to be talking about won't really apply. But we're going to start off but I'm going to do these in alphabetical order, starting off with the Argonians. They are the reptilian race well suited for the treacherous swamps of their homeland, which is Black Marsh, and have developed natural immunities to poisons. They can breathe underwater and are good at picking locks. And if you go to their open stats screen, you can see their basic spread depending on their origin, which will change for every race. I'm not going to go through these for every race, because that's not really related to the character. This is more of just me trying to give you a general idea of what each race is kind of known for. So Argonians in particular are actually quite good at being not only thieves but mages. When you do the Mages Guild questline, you'll see quite a lot of them. But beyond that, you'll also see them within places like the Dark Brotherhood, the Thieves Guild. They're very good at being these two classes. Like if you want to be a thief, you want to be an assassin, you want to be a mage, they're great at all of those. And they have a lot of backstory to them, especially with the older games like with Morrowind, because they were slaves in that game. So there's a lot of history, bad blood between them and the Dark Elves. But if you look at the chart to see how players in this world react to them, because there's a racism chart that's built into the game. I don't know if you guys knew this. It's called Relations, but we all know what that means. Argonians actually don't have too many enemies. In fact, nobody really feels any particular way about them in Cyrodiil. Other Argonians like them, but that's about it. Players who want to be an Argonian, I would say, are interested in playing something that's a little more fantastical. I mean, they're like dragon lizard people. I mean, they're like literally lizard people. So, your miles may vary. They look fantastic in the remaster. They used to look kind of goofy. I would play as them in Morrowind from time to time because they were interesting. They looked kind of unique, and you'd also get a lot of really unique interactions with people. You don't get that as much as an Argonian. You will with some of the other races on this list, but overall, I would say if you are somebody who wants to play as like a mage and you maybe don't want to just play as like the standard looking human mage or something like that, I would definitely pick an Argonian, or you can play with like a shadow scale where you play as a Argonian born under the sign of the shadow and then try to join the Dark Brotherhood and just sort of role play as that. It's very cool. You could also play as like a ghost hist worshiper Argonian, basically. These are people that their trees specifically have to steal the souls, I think, of other dead Argonians. And so they're like very pale, kind of like this guy. I mean, this guy's pretty pale anyway, but you could try to probably make that a little bit lighter, and then you'd have essentially what you were looking for, give them like some nice bright red eyes, and you're on your way. You'd just be assassinating people, doing whatever necromancy you can, which really isn't a lot, but you could do some conjuration or whatever, and maybe some illusion and assassination, have a good time. But yeah, that's the Argonians. I'm a big fan of them. They're probably like my second or third favorite race in the game. I just like how unique they are, and they have a lot of background, and they're also kind of an underdog. I don't feel like a lot of people play as Argonians, so they have a soft spot in my heart. Next, we're going up to the Bretons. So these are in alphabetical order at the top, so we're just going to be going one after another. So Bretons are interesting because technically the best way I could equate these two is they're like half elves, but not really, because they don't look like them anymore. They're basically just humans at this point. But back in their bloodline, like a long time ago, they intermixed with the elves that lived in the area that they're from, which is High Rock. And again, I'm going to be showing the maps. You've probably noticed it in the last one where I just popped the map up right here. I'm doing that again here. So they're from High Rock. It's very like a medieval fantasy, like the most medieval standard fantasy that you can think of for anything. That's like sort of the area that the Bretons live. They're very good mages, and we're also going to read this anyway, because I'll read this for all of them. But if you want to play a battle mage, this is pretty much the race to pick. And obviously they have their stats here, which I'll open up before I read this. This one would probably be a better battle mage, but they're predominantly good at doing things with magic because of their elven blood. But let's read this really fast. In addition to their quick and perceptive grasp of spellcraft, even the humblest of Bretons can boast a resistance to magical energies. They are particularly skilled at summoning and healing magic. If you're going to play a Breton, you're pretty much going to be locking yourself in as a mage-like character. And the best way I like to think of these guys is they're sort of like the Dunedain from Lord of the Rings. Like, they don't look like elves anymore, but they're sort of these like longer-lived, like Numenorian mixed with elven blood peoples. So they're very capable magically. They have a lot of old lore that maybe some of the other races like Imperials wouldn't have. But overall, I don't actually play as Bretons very much. I find them to be kind of boring. I typically steer away from the more human races, but I almost never play as a Breton or an Imperial, although I do think Imperials are honestly a little bit cooler because of the variety. A Breton is pretty much just a Breton. If you like playing a battle mage, though, I mean, if you want to go like stat wise and you want to sort of like min max your character, they start off with 50 intelligence and willpower. Unfortunately, if you do the high rock start, unfortunately, I would do the sister start because then you get 50 strength. But it's all going to be up to you and depending on what you want to do. But they have pretty good stats overall, and people seem to like them enough. And if you want to look at the chart to see how much people like them in particular, you can also see that nobody really dislikes Bretons either. It's pretty much just that other Bretons like each other. But overall, nobody feels a particular way about them. Nobody's going to be racist to the Bretons. That is not going to be the same way for the next race because they have a superiority complex. And those, of course, are the Dark Elves, which is a lot of people's favorite because of Morrowind, which is a fantastic game, of course. But also known as Dunmer in their homeland of Morrowind, Dark Elves are noted for their skilled and balanced integration of the sword and the bow and destruction magic. They are resistant to fire and can summon an ancestral ghost for aid. So these are very all-round characters. I would say that pound for pound, Dark Elves are probably one of the most well-rounded stat-wise like races in the game. They have pretty solid stats overall. They can do almost everything that you would want them to be. You could make them fighters, probably not with heavy armor because they don't typically do that in their homeland either. They usually wear like a chitin armor. So you can make them great warriors like with light armor. You can make them great mages. You can make them great thieves because they're pretty good at that too. They're pretty much just like, if you want to do anything and everything, or if you want to just like mess around and try, this is a great race to pick. I've played a lot of Dark Elves, and typically when I do, I usually play as like a destruction mage specifically, like sort of a fire mage or whatever, because that seems to fit their character. They're not as well known for being good at like every kind of magic, but they are very good at, I would say, like conjuration. They're really good at like destruction magic, like lightning, whatever. And they're good at some other magics because they have the Telvanni and stuff back home in Morrowind. So the Telvanni is one of the great houses, very good at magic. They're good at manipulating the earth, but they also, the Dark Elves love slavery. They love being racist. They have a superiority complex. If you're a person that feels that way, that could be something for you. But if you look at this chart, they are probably the most egregiously disliked one on here. Argonians hate them because they were slaves to Dark Elves, so they start off with -10 opinion. Bretons don't like them either. They have -5. Dark Elves don't even get a bonus because they don't really even like each other. High Elves hate them because they consider them lesser because they are cursed. If you don't know about the curse, it involves the tribunal, which you can look up some videos for that. Imperials don't like them very much because they've been a pain. Khajiit don't like them either because they were also slaves, although not as bad as Argonians were. Nords don't like them because they're next door and they've fought each other for years. Orcs, interestingly, don't have a negative opinion of any other race, so you're not going to see them on this list because orcs have kind of been beaten down and sort of wandering forever, so they don't really have a major opinion of anybody. They're just trying to survive. They're much more nomadic than the other races on this list, so they don't really count. Redguards, I'm not sure why they wouldn't like Dark Elves, but I mean, why not just get them in there? Same with Wood Elves. Both of those are kind of too far removed and not very politically active, I wouldn't say, in those areas. I wouldn't think anyway, but they both get -5 for their opinion. So when you play as a Dark Elf, you just have to keep in mind that everyone's going to dislike you, at least a little bit, besides an Orc. But at the reverse of that, you can pretty much do whatever you want. So if you're a person who's like not too sure what you want to start off as, you have your Assassin, your Mage character, you have your pretty much just Mage character, and now you have your All-Rounder right here. So that's something to keep in mind when you're considering a character. Next, we're going to jump over to the High Elves, and I actually hate the High Elves. I'm going to be upfront with you. This is probably my least played race besides maybe Bretons. I never play as the High Elves. I find them to be awful whenever you interact with them. They're not so bad in Cyrodiil, but in the other games they can be pretty annoying, especially in Skyrim. I think that everybody knows about them if you've played it. So, but anyway, these are known as the Altmer. In their homeland of Somerset Isle, the High Elves are exceptionally gifted in the arcane arts. They also boast resistance to illness. However, they are also somewhat vulnerable to fire, frost, and shock. So, of course, these are mages. They're pretty much just made to be mages. But interestingly, they are weak to other magics because they get a ridiculous magicka bonus, which I don't know if I showed you that on the Bretons, but they get a 50 bonus. High Elves get a 100 bonus. So they already start off with 100 more magicka than the other races. Interestingly, even though they're supposed to be like the best mages in the world, I mean, they make beautiful cities out of magic, their stats actually start off worse than Bretons do. So I honestly can't think of a reason to play as a High Elf unless you just really like playing as that snooty, stereotypical, like better than you elves, because otherwise with their weaknesses to fire, frost, and shock, and some illnesses, they're not that great. I used to play as them in Daggerfall when I would play because I think they're completely immune to poison for some reason, and poison's a huge annoyance in that game, and so I would often pick them. This is another like predominantly magic focused character. They don't typically see them as like warriors or like fighting in like the Fighters Guild or something, but you will see them in the Mages Guild. You will also see them, I think, in maybe the Dark Brotherhood. You could probably mess around in the arena, but yeah, other than that, I would say this is another mage specific character. Like these two, are going to be your mages. And the next one's actually going to be a well-rounded one. Before we jump into that, we got to look at our racism chart because, you just have to. And high elves are not particularly liked. That sense of superiority definitely makes other people not like them. The only ones who don't care, interestingly enough, are Nords because they have never done anything to Nords ever, and they never will. Skyrim hasn't happened yet. That's 200 years in the future, but they will soon, very soon, dislike them too. But as you can see, they have -10 with Argonians, -5 with Bretons, -10 with Dark Elves. They do like each other a little bit more with +5, -5 with Imperials, -10 with Khajiit, -5, and -5 for the last two. And the only reason I can imagine that is because they live in the Somerset Isles, which again, the map is here in the bottom right corner. And the only thing I can imagine is because they typically tend to like stick along the coasts, maybe they probably have attacked these people from time to time, and they also are, like they're very pretentious. Like nobody wants to have a pretentious, art school degree holder attacking their homeland. That's a terrible analogy, but that's basically what they are. So if you want to play as a character that has this sort of sense of moral superiority and is maybe really annoying and doesn't like or is disliked by a lot of people, kind of like the Dark Elves, and there you go, perfect mage for you. Next up, we're coming to the Imperials, and the Imperials are like probably the most well-rounded besides the Dunmer, I would say. In fact, they might be a little bit more if we look at their stats. So you have the Nibbenese and the Colovians. Colovians are a little more rural, a little more rustic, and then the Nibbenese would be a little more city-focused, like they're just like city dwellers. And I know I didn't say that for this one, but the Somerset Isles would be like their main homeland, and this is like outside of that. I think one of the Isles. And then same thing with Vardenfell, the island from Morrowind. This is the mainland Morrowind. And I think with this one, yeah, High Rock Sisters. Okay, we talked about that. These are natives of the civilized, cosmopolitan province of Cyrodiil. They have proved to be shrewd diplomats and traders. They are skilled with heavy armor and in societal skills and tend to favor the warrior classes. So they are really well-rounded overall, but yes, they do tend to be more like heavy armor, standard sword and board fighters, if that is something that you're looking for. And a lot of people are when they play this game for the first time. And I know I haven't been scrolling down to the armor skills, but you guys can look at these. I'm not talking about like what the best way to min-max your character is. I'm just showing you like a basic stat spread and giving you some incentive maybe to play as these races. Imperials are cool because you can essentially play as whoever you want human-wise because they come in all shapes and sizes and varieties. And I think that's a really appealing thing. Like Colovians, again, this would be like Skingrad, Khajiit, which I'm going to show you on the map, like down here. This would be like Skingrad, Khajiit. It's kind of like Anvil. Anvil doesn't count as Colovia, really. That's like the coast. That's the Epicene shore. But places like that are where you'd get Colovia, and these are like more fur trappers. Like honestly, kind of like French Canadians. That's kind of what I've always imagined in my head, even though the Imperials are very much based around Rome. Like, of course, they would be. They're called Imperials after all. They're like very Roman inspired. I do think that some of them is influenced by other things. Like, I don't know why, but with Colovia, I've always imagined them as like fur trappers or just like these very rustic peoples that came from a great society that live over in another region now, which not necessarily outside of their own province, but maybe you understand what I'm saying. If you want to play as like a well-rounded warrior character, Imperials are pretty much one of the better ones to do, although it's hard to say that because I don't know why you would play as a well-rounded one when you have people like Nords, Orcs, and Redguards, which I think are overall better than them in pretty much every way as a warrior. So it's hard to say. They do get a personality bonus, but that's kind of sucks. Speechcraft is really bad in Oblivion. I don't usually play as Imperials personally, but if you're somebody who wants to just play as like a very standard, like I am a human warrior, I mean, this is pretty much it, right? And if you look at their relations chart, they have nothing across the board. They're the only ones on the list that don't, and I think it's just because this is their province. You're in your homeland, so people are pretty much visiting you. It's surprising that they wouldn't have anything for anybody else, considering they don't like some of the other races, but as far as you go and like people coming to visit you, I mean, you're set. So if you don't want anybody to dislike you, this is also a great pick. Next, we have the Khajiit, and these are hailing from the province of Elsewhere. They are intelligent, quick, and agile. They make excellent thieves due to their natural agility and unmatched acrobatic skills all Khajiit can see in the dark. Between them and the Wood Elves, these are probably the two best thief classes, or thief races, I should say. If you look at their stat spread here, you can see that they have quite high agility, which is their top skill, and they have really good speed and endurance and everything. So they're great at like sneaking around. They're good at doing like Thieves Guild stuff. They're good at doing Dark Brotherhood stuff. Not so much, I mean, you can, but not so much like the Fighters Guild. But something that I love about Khajiit, as opposed to maybe some of the other races, is that there's like multiple different varieties of Khajiit. Some of them look more like people. Some of them are literally as big as a house cat. Some of them are like the size of a tiger, and they can still talk. It's really interesting, and I would love it for in the future if they would lean more into the variety of Khajiit and like how they look, rather than just having it be like this specific kind of Khajiit for the whole region, because this is one kind of Khajiit. Every game has basically featured a different kind. That's why they all sort of look a little different. At least that's what the lore heads, the lore beards have explained it as. But there are different kinds of Khajiit. Some of them are literally like tiny, and some of them are enormous, which is cool. But as far as like actually playing as them, I typically don't. I have played as them in Morrowind quite a bit, but I don't think I've ever played as one outside of that. Maybe in Skyrim. You know, we all have tried the punch cat thing, if you've ever heard of that video. I've definitely given that a go. But otherwise, you know, they come from this very deserty type of place. It kind of reminds me of like the Middle East, India region. So like over that way. Whereas like Imperials are obviously very Roman. These guys are very like standard fantasy. High elves, you know, snobby, mean. These guys are honestly, they're kind of the same, but they're racist. And then you have very like standard fantasy. These guys are like lizard people that worship trees. They're also controlled by trees in like a hive mind. So that's, I mean, again, another point for Argonians. That's sick. Khajiit are like, they remind me of people who would like wander the Silk Road, who would be like great traders and selling exotic goods. They definitely remind me of like Persia, for like if I wanted to give like an equivalent. That's sort of how their area feels to me. It's not all desert, but they're like have some deserts in their lands. They have some lush like Mediterranean style, like beautiful cities, like, you know, they'll have like a Baghdad or something. Like it's all there. If that's something that interests you, like that's sort of their thing, in my opinion. That's how they've always felt to me. So if that's something that appeals to you, I would definitely pick as them. Plus they also look fantastic in the remaster. The two beast races look unbelievably good. So if you want to like play as something that looks cool and is definitely fantastical, you know, this is like a cat human, this is a lizard human. I mean, you can't go wrong, right? Looking at their chart, however, for how people feel about them, I was surprised by this. I did not know that Khajiit only like other Khajiit, but they don't have any negative opinion, or nobody has any negative opinion, I should say, of them. From the other things, you would think that Dark Elves would at least not like them, because I would assume that with Argonians and with Khajiit, they would get at least a little bit of a negative from the Dark Elves, but apparently the Dark Elves are just, they don't care. They don't think about their former slaves very much, and maybe that's true. But so the Khajiit have a very small spread. They're pretty much well liked by everybody. If you want to play as a great thief, a unique looking thief at that, you know, you can't go wrong with a Khajiit. Nords, these guys don't need any introduction. These are the citizens of Skyrim. They are tall and fair-haired people, strong and hardy. Nords are famous for their resistance to the cold, and they're highly talented warriors. So in my opinion, Nords are pretty undercooked in Oblivion, and many of you have played Skyrim. It's broken up between Eastern and Western. Eastern would just give you a little bit better chance of using magic, which is crazy because they're still really bad at it. And Western would give you a little bit more of the strength of the reach. You know, you're a little hardier. Overall, I love playing as Nords because they are really talented warriors. And if you play as a Western Skyrim person, they get 50 endurance and 50 strength. So if you are somebody who wants to min-max, that is something to keep in mind. They are really good at doing that. However, cold doesn't come up. Cold magic in general doesn't come up as much as it does in Skyrim. In Skyrim, it almost makes sense to only play as them because frost magic is insane. And they obviously it's their homeland, so usually people feel more incentivized, like in Morrowind, you play as a Dark Elf, even though they still hate you. And in Cyrodiil, you maybe play as an Imperial because you'll feel like you're at home, and you know, Skyrim, you're playing as a Nord because you feel like you're at home. My first character in Oblivion was a Nord, and I had no problem with it. It just feels like a very safe pick, kind of like the Imperial, kind of like not even like the Breton. The Breton's like if you want to be a mage, it's kind of stupid not to pick a Breton because they're just so good at it. Even if they are kind of a boring race, like looks wise, they're just insanely strong. Whereas with a Nord, I feel like I would rather tell you to pick like a Redguard, even though they're very similar, like stats-wise, you can see. Like, actually, I think they're identical. Yeah, it's a 1-for-1. So if you want to play as a warrior, I guess you could pick as the Redguard or the Nord. I honestly thought that the Redguard got a little bit more. Redguards were like the best warriors in Morrowind. They pretty much like started out being able to actually hit things if you use Longblade, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Nords are typically very like Celtic or very Viking-ish. I don't think they've gone total Viking like they do in Skyrim just yet. They still have a little bit of a broader lore appeal to them, if that's something that interests you. They were a lot less Viking in the old lore and a lot more like Celtic, Germanic in the older lore. So they still kind of have semblances of that. It's a shame you don't really have too much face paint, I don't think, because that makes them quite unique. But if you wanted to play as sort of like a cold warrior, like, you know, you're hiking through the mountains and you've made your way to Cyrodiil, you maybe got arrested for something, and now you're wandering around trying to save this place, I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, everybody likes playing as a Viking. The Viking games are super popular. Vikings in general, Viking stuff is really popular. So if you just want to lean into that aspect of them, you could do that too. Nords are another one that, this one surprises me because I feel like Nords are kind of like human high elves where they have a very high opinion of themselves, but they don't actually feel that negatively about anybody. In fact, they don't. And only Nords like other Nords, or well, I should say Nords like other Nords, but that's it. Like they are another one of these races that confusingly doesn't have anybody that's like really disliking them. And I feel like the Dark Elves would, but again, they don't. So it's whatever. Like everybody seems to like you well enough. Again, I feel like people who played Skyrim might tend to lean towards playing as a Nord because it feels familiar and they're kind of cool. They look a little weird to me in the Oblivion Remaster. A lot of the human races do. Like this guy looks very uncanny to me for some reason. But you know, if you can get over that, I think that it's a great pick. And if you want to play as a warrior who's resistant to cold specifically, you know, then this is the one for you. If you want to lean into that and give maybe like I don't know, frost resistance and use the astronaut sign to just get more resistant to magic, then that's a great pick. Next up, we have the orcs. If you've watched this channel, you know this is my favorite race. I always play as an orc. So the people of the Hrothgarian and Dragontail Mountains, orcish armorers are prized for their craftsmanship. Orc troops in heavy armor are among the finest in the Empire and are fearsome when using their beast rage, or berserker rage rather. So if we open up their stat spread here, you can see that they can actually start off really great if you use the Stronghold Orc. They get 45 strength, 50 willpower, and 50 endurance, but they have a pretty negative like opposite to that. I personally recommend doing Orsinium Orcs because they can then be battle mages. And they actually make a pretty solid battle mage, which is what I've been playing as in the Oblivion Remaster. And what I've played as many times in the past too. I had a Morrowind series on this channel years ago. I don't know if it's still up on the channel, but I played as a head of the Telvanni that was an orc and used like blunt weaponry. I like orcs a lot because they're the race that I think the most encapsulates that wandering, like nomad, like still searching for home lifestyle. If that's something that interests you, that's something that appeals to me. I think it's very like noble, and it's also very tragic. You know, their home in Orsinium has constantly been destroyed and like rebuilt and moved around, and they're kind of like a people without a home. Like they're like people without a country. Yet they still endure, and so they have essentially wandered around trying to prove themselves. They're great warriors, fantastic warriors. Not as good as these two, like at the gate, but they have a pretty solid stat spread with 45 strength. I mean, especially with Orsinium, like this is really good as a battle mage. I'm not as good as like, you know, a Breton, but honestly, it's pretty solid. I really like playing as battle mage orcs, or even just all around just like a fighter orc. The only problem is orcs have like really bad personalities, especially the Orsinium ones. Negative. They have 25 personality. They are very brash, very direct, very in your face, and so that leads to people not necessarily liking them very much. And so if you look at our chart here, you'll see that everybody has a -5 to orcs, and other orcs don't even like orcs that much. So they don't have any opinion on anybody, even themselves, and it's just because they're so spread out. But everybody doesn't like orcs, at least a little bit. So that 25 personality that you'll get with Orsinium start, it's going to be down now to like 20. So pretty much everybody is mean to you because they just don't really care for you. You're very different looking too as an orc. And they kind of consider you to be like these savages that, you know, they're kind of like one of the many displaced peoples of the world, and people look at them negatively because they don't really have a country. I think that that's a very compelling race and like character to play as because of that. They have a lot of background and story, and they're, you know, these beautiful craftsmen, these beautiful proud peoples, and I'm just a huge fan of orcs. So if that's something that you want to play as, like a role play as a character like that, then this is who you should pick, in my opinion. Nearly done here. We're next at the most naturally talented warriors in Tamriel. In addition to their cultural affinities for many weapons and armor styles, they also have hardy constitutions and natural resistance to disease and poison. And you have the Dragontail Mountains, which this would be up to the north, that would be like bordering Skyrim, and then you have the Alakir Desert. Personally, I would choose the Dragontail Mountains just because they get 50 endurance and 50 strength, but that's me. Even though I said that Khajiit are a lot like Middle Eastern, so are the Redguards, but in a like more of a North African way. Like if North Africa or like Nigeria or like, you know, like Central Africa up is more of like what Hammerfell is. I almost always played as a Redguard back in the Morrowind days because they were just so good at doing Longblade. And if you're like a new player, they have pretty good resistance to disease too, which helped a ton. They're overall not somebody that I typically play as much, but I think they have a lot of cool, unique backstory, especially with like the Elder Scrolls Redguard, where they have like a lot of piracy along their coasts, which I think is sick. They also have that with the High Elves, if that's something that interests you. There are High Elf pirates. There are also like Nord pirates as well. If you want to play as like a more pirate character, I would pick one of those three. Bretons probably have some too, but again, I mean, they look stupid. I'm not trying to hate on the Bretons, but I just don't like them as much. But with Redguards, like you could definitely lean into being like a swashbuckling, really cool pirate like character if you wanted to, where you could be like a proud warrior who's like good at a bunch of different things. Like you sort of make this master of all weaponry sort of character. I don't know why you would do that because you don't have to, but you could. I've noticed that I've not talked about bows at all with any of these races. And that's because Wood Elves are coming up next, and I feel like they're the only ones that I ever play as a bow character. So let me just think really fast. I would say that these guys would be good at it because they're good at every kind of weapon. Khajiit, definitely. Argonians. I usually would say like these three are the ones I pick, and then Dunmer sometimes too. They're pretty good at it as well, in case you were curious. But you can use a bow with anybody. It doesn't matter. You can pretty much do anything too. I don't want to stress that here at the beginning, or here at the end almost of the video. You can do pretty much whatever you want as any race. It doesn't really matter who you play as. It's just, what do you want to like kind of role play as? This is a role playing game, you know, like what role do you want to play? These guys are fantastic warriors, probably the most naturally gifted, as they said, in all of Tamriel. They're better than Nords, they're better than Orcs, even though it's like a close 1 and 2, or I guess 2 and 3. But like, if you want to be the best of the best and be really good at multiple weapons, or really good at doing a bunch of things like that, then Redguard is the right choice for you. Man, I don't have a ton else to say about them. I don't typically play as them, but let's look at their chart and see how people feel about them. And people don't feel a particular way about them. Redguards like other Redguards. Imperials don't like them too much, and Bretons don't like them too much. And I would assume that's because they do tend to raid into those territories they have in the past. Some of their pirates, which are kind of unregulated, because I think Hammerfell's a little more broken up than the other regions. Like, I don't think, but yeah, that's pretty much it. They're a great pick if you want to play as the curved sword meme. It's a no-brainer. And last but never least, we have the clan folk of Western Valenwood Forest, also known as the Bosmer. These are the Wood Elves, are nimble and quick, making them good scouts and thieves, and they are no finer archers in all of Tamriel. Their ability to command simple creatures is well known. These are your bog standard, or they appear at the surface anyway, your bog standard forest dwelling elf. So like Lord of the Rings Wood Elf. The only difference is that they have in their background, and I've not been able to do this for everybody because I don't know the lore that well, but they have something known as the Pact, where they don't, not all of them, but they don't like take anything from the forest. So they won't like cut down trees. They'll grow their homes out of like living branches. They won't kill anything in the forest, so they'll leave everything like sort of wild and free. And they'll instead be like cannibals. They'll like eat other races or like peoples. They're pretty brutal. Obviously, they are fantastic archers. Their homes are usually pretty high up in those trees, from what I understand. So they sort of use like walkways and stuff. And I believe some of their trees even move around, if I'm not mistaken. And so they're very, very cool in that regard. Argonians are really cool. These are probably the two coolest areas, I think, because Argonia, like Black Marsh, is just crazy with the histories and all the crazy stuff that goes on there. Argonians, again, I'm going to go back to them again for a second. They're sort of like Central South Americans, but like in the Inca, Aztec, Mayan days. Like, so if you wanted to get a perspective of like what their area is like, I didn't say that at the time, but I mean, I'm just gonna tell you now. Like, there's like Scandinavia. This, I don't even know who you would say the orcs are like. North Africa, you know, there we go. This is like, it's like a jungle as well. They sort of live in like a big great forest. I would say this is like kind of like the Amazon. I don't really know what you would even equate it to. It's just like big forest, so big fantasy forest with crazy cannibalistic elves that grow things out of trees. Like, very standard, honestly. I would say like the Warhammer elves and these elves are very similar, the Wood Elves anyway. If you look at their stat spread, you can see that they have phenomenal agility and speed regardless of who you pick. Reaper's March, I believe, is the area right next to Cyrodiil. And so they've been fighting with the Imperials for a long time, because Imperials have been encroaching upon Valenwood, which is where they live. You can see right here. And I think the Great Wood is more like to the south along the coast, which would be closer to, I think, Somerset. I think the Somerset people have been, or like the High Elves have been encroaching upon that too. They also were devastated by Mulling Ball. As you can see, this is pretty much the only race to play as if you want to play as an archer. And I know that people probably don't want me to say that because I just said that you don't have to, but they are the best at it, and they make the most sense to do it. They're great as like a scout or a thief, as it says here. So I typically tend to play as them in like the Dark Brotherhood or the Thieves Guild. Sometimes the Arena too, if I want to. Like, you can do anything you want. You can do every guild if you really want to. I just typically like to do them with different characters because I think it's more fun with the role play. So again, it's summary, because I'm about to wrap this up once we look at the chart. So I just want to like go back over everything. We have essentially a mage, thief, assassin type character, battle mage, just standard like character here. A really well-rounded character. They can do pretty much everything. Mages with a little bit of warrior. I would say like a light armored warrior. The best well-rounded character probably. Thief, assassin, sometimes mages too. They're pretty good at that as well, but not as good as Argonians are at being mages. So they're sort of like very similar, these two. These guys are better thieves. These guys would be better mages. Nords, warriors, pretty much that. They're not that good at magic. They're not that good at thieving either. So pretty much just get warriors here. I would say warriors and battle mages for orcs, because they do tend to have some, like a little bit, but again, not a lot of magic. Definitely not good at being thieves. Well, at least not at the start. You can do whatever you want again, but definitely warriors. Definitely you can do some mages. the best warriors that there are. They can also be mages. You just don't typically see them because they don't trust magic, so it's not something you're going to notice. And then you have thieves and assassins here. You can also make them mages. That happens sometimes too, but typically not. I believe the antagonist of this game is actually a wood elf. And then as far as wood elves relations, nobody feels particularly about them. They don't tend to leave Valenwood that much, and if they do, there's only a couple of them, and they tend to be pretty amicable to the other races, so they just get the +5 to themselves, and everybody kind of just leaves them alone. They're handy, they're useful, they're pretty polite as far as you'll see in the game, so again, great race to pick. And that's going to be it for me. I hope that this video was useful. I know that the game came out a couple weeks ago, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to make a video like this, which is why it's coming out as like an extra one. But maybe if you're somebody who like wanted to know a little bit more about the races in depth, or just to like listen to somebody yap about them, to sort of give you an idea of what you wanted to do, then here you go. I hope that this helps you. But as always, I want to thank my channel members for their continued support, and in particular my Paladin tier members. Those are Dwayne the Rock Lobster, Zora, Luigi, Dunyal, Valadar, Lackland, Grazo, Rise, Titus, Furkan, J Dizzle, Ghidorah, and Kandrif. You guys are awesome. If you like this video, please make sure you like, comment, subscribe. I don't typically make things like this, so it always helps when people get their eyes on it and when people spread the word. As always, I'm sold. This has been What Elder Scrolls Race is Best for You, and I will happily see you in the next one.